Hi everyone, a warm welcome to all of you. Today I'm going to be proceeding with the second part of my lecture on surgical endodontics. A quick recap, in the first lecture I had briefly covered the definition of surgical endo, the indications and the contraindications where you're supposed to be performing the surgical endodontics, where you're supposed to avoid it, what are the anatomical considerations you're supposed to keep in mind when you're about to perform a surgery on a patient like the maxillary sinus or the inferior alveolar nerve, the different types of surgery, that is the classification was given, followed by the different kinds of flaps and the principles behind the flap surgery along with their designs. So today I'm going to be proceeding with the second part. So we start off with the basic instruments which are going to be used for our surgical endodontics. So over here you can see there are different kinds of Bord-Parker blades. So you can see that for the stab incision you can use the number 11 and the number 12, and for creating the flaps you can use the 15 and the 15C. So stab incision is generally where you have to start giving your vertical incisions, and your flap generally goes in the clavicular area also. Yeah, so you can use that for you can use the 15 and the 15C for the clavicular part. Coming to the handpieces, obviously we cannot use the normal handpieces which we use in our restorative dentistry because of the size, and also we would like a deeper contra angle so that you can gain better access to the root end. So you have to use a micro head or a mini head. So you can see the design of the handpiece on the left, whereas and you can also see that a contra angle is used. The angulated head is going to actually help you to be able to reach the root tip for the resection purpose. These are the burrs which are to be used for resecting the root tip and for drilling into the bone. As you can see, they're all the tungsten carbide burrs, so the cutting efficiency is much higher. You have to keep in mind that since you're using the tungsten carbide burrs, they do dull faster as well. So I mean, like if you have a roaring practice with a lot of surgeries to be done, so you may have to like replace them often. But yes, the cutting efficiency is definitely good, and you can actually save time instead of using your stainless steel burrs. Okay, so one thing you have to keep in mind is that when you are going to be drilling into bone and when you're going to be contacting the root surface, quite a large amount of heat is going to be generated because of the handpiece, which is why the function of the coolant is very, very important. In our case, the coolant is nothing but water, which is coming out from the handpiece. So it is best that the coolant is directed straight at the head of the burr, so that the tissue debris does not clog the flutes of the burr, and so that the site will also be cooled down to prevent necrosis of the tissue. So here you can see from the right to left the different sizes of the handpieces. So we prefer to use the one in the middle, that is the micro head, which is the surgical handpiece. The one on the right is the standard one, which we use for our restorative dentistry. You can also be using your ultrasonic handpieces for actual troughing of the root apex, so that will be covered later. So in order to create a proper restorative cavity so that you can fill in your retrograde root filling material, you have to use your ultrasonic handpiece to actually trough the dentine surface, the root tip surface, so that you can actually place your restorative material. The one on the top is the bone curette. This is used to remove all the granulation tissue and to scrape off all the necrotic slough which is generated during the procedure or because of a result of the infection. And we have the MTA carrier. So this is a special device which is used to transport the MTA, that is your mineral trioxide aggregate. This is one of the most suitable retrograde filling materials. So this is what is placed at the site of the surgery after you have resected the root tip. So we actually try to fill the MTA into the root tip surface after the root resection has been done. So this instrument, as you can see, the tip is again a contra angle tip. So you can it will be easier for you to actually push the MTA into the resected root surface. Please keep in mind the MTA carrier is actually a very delicate device. It bends easily, so you should not be using too much of force when you are handling it, because you can damage the carrier. Now, these are certain terms which you will come across when you are dealing with your periradicular surgery. So, the first is the bony crypt. This is nothing but the cavity which you are going to be making during your surgical procedure. Then you have the curettage. Curettage, I'm sure you're all familiar with, because you have already cleared your periodontics classes. So in this case, you are just removing whatever diseased or necrotic tissue is present around the root surface. And then of course you have the root end resection. This is where the handpiece and the burrs come into play. So you have to remove the apical portion of the root. Ideally speaking, you have to remove 3 mm of the root surface, of the root tip. So why 3 mm? That will be covered in the future slides. The explanation will be given, and it's a very valid one also. So you have to remember that 3 mm is the ideal amount of root surface which has to be removed from the tip. And of course, after your root resection, you have to do your root end preparation, so that you can actually prepare the root end cavity to receive the root end filling. So the root end filling, the examples are your MTA and biodentine. So at a time when we did not have MTA and biodentine, because these are recent advances, in the previous generations, like maybe like 40 to 50 years ago, even amalgam was used, like I mentioned in the earlier class. And if not amalgam, then they use GIC. But then the problem with GIC is that because you cannot obtain a moisture free environment, the properties of GIC are diminished, because of which the chances of failure and subsequent reinfection increase. This is why now we have come up with better materials like MTA, biodentines. So what are the indications for apical curettage? When do you do it, and why do you do it? So the first and the foremost is to remove your contaminated tissues. That includes the necrotic cementum also, which is formed as a result of the lesion. You want to gain access to the root for your surgical purpose, because you want to place your root end filling material. So it is not an orthograde filling, that is, you do not start from the root canal access opening area and then proceed to the root tip. You are going the other way around. You are proceeding from the root tip to the coronal surface. You want to remove any overextended root canal fillings. This is another indication for your surgery, like I had mentioned in the previous class. You want to remove any long standing persistent lesion which is not healing despite your multiple attempts of root canal treatment. You want to eliminate a persistent sinus tract. So you have tried doing your root canal twice or maybe even thrice in some cases, and you still see that sinus tract is persisting and it is reappearing again and again. So that means it is the body's way of telling you that it is time to think along the lines of surgery. And of course, if you want to obtain any specimen for biopsy. So here you can see the different kinds of indications where you can consider doing surgery. The first is when you create a ledge, as you can see in the first figure on the left, on the top left, the case of inoperable roots. So you have created a ledge and it is quite short of the apex. So in such cases, you are worried about the chance of an infection of the remaining portion of the root canal. So in such cases, you can do a surgical intervention. The second is if there is a separated instrument, especially when it is when the instrument which is separated has gone beyond the apex of the root. So in such cases, a foreign body reaction will definitely occur. So it is best to remove the separated instrument. To do so, yes, you do require surgical intervention. Of course, you are always welcome to try in the orthograde manner. You can try to actually pull out the instrument, but if it has gone beyond the apex, the chances of pulling or retrieving the instrument are slim through the orthograde fashion. So you actually need to go in a retrograde manner. Okay, and then if there is, if the canals are blocked or if there is resorption and you are not able to reach up to the apex of the root with your files and your irrigants, then yes, it is time to think along the lines of surgery. If you have perforated your root, so when you are doing your cleaning and shaping, suddenly you see there is an influx of blood into the root canal. So then you can actually suspect that you have perforated the root. So then for the sealing of the perforation, you definitely have to do surgical intervention. Anatomic considerations. So as you can see in the fifth figure, the middle of the bottom row, you can see that in the molar, the first molar, you can see that there are large periapical lesions, and you can barely see the shadow of the pulpal chamber in the root, of the pulp canal in the roots. So in such cases, and because of the weird curvature, it's going to be difficult for your conventional hand files to actually reach to the tip of the root. So in such cases, you may want to intervene surgically. And the last but not the least is the extrusion of obturating material. But I hope you remember from the last class that if the root canal sealer is the material which has gone beyond the apex, you don't need to intervene surgically, because the sealer will dissolve on its own over a period of time. It is only when the gutta percha has flown beyond. So in these cases, in this figure, it looks like the thermoplasticized GP has gone beyond, because of which a surgical intervention is required, because foreign body reaction will follow. The contraindications for root end resection, when you are supposed to think twice before attempting surgery. The first is the unfavorable crown root ratio. So if you remember, you have to do something called root resection. So in that, you have to remove 3 mm of the root surface from the tip of the root. So in the first photo, if you can see, the root length is actually very less. It is probably only around 5 to 6 mm. So if you go ahead by removing 3 mm, what is going to be left of the tooth structure? Nothing. So in such cases, we do not wish to do a root resection. If there is a chance of a furcation involvement, because if you can see, the furcation is positioned apically. So in such cases, we do not wish to perform our root end resection, because the chances of perforation are higher. Yeah, and if you have fused roots, yes, it is a complication, because when you are doing the root resection of one end, you might accidentally damage the other end also, and it may not be a very even incision, resection of the root. So in such cases, for fused roots, we do not prefer to do root end resection. If there is decreased bone support, so if you can see the fourth picture, which is on the bottom left, you can see that there is no bone support, it's not adequate bone support for the root, for the tooth structure. So in such cases, even if you do perform your surgery, there won't be enough healthy bone left which will actually be able to support the tooth. So the chances of failure of such surgeries are significantly higher. And the last, if you can see, the root form is quite poor. So you are not able to appreciate where the root is ending and what is the structure of the root, whether resorption has taken place or not. So in such cases, root surgery can be. Now coming to the root end resection, why do we do it? We do it to better visualize the seal which is created by the orthograde obturating materials. So generally, when we are doing our surgical endodontics, we have to do our traditional root canal as well. So when you are resecting the root surface 3 mm from the tip of the root, you can actually see your gutta percha also of the obturation, which is now going to be visible at the resected end of the root. So you will be able to see whether the gutta percha is firmly lodged or whether it is loose. If it is loose, you may have to do your root canal obturation again. And the second reason is to produce a root end seal. So you wish to apply or you wish to restore it with root end filling material, preferably MTA or biodentine. Okay, so this is to prevent reinfection of the root canal and also to induce proper healing of the periradicular bone. The three important factors which must be considered prior to performing the resection is the type of the burr. So you know the types of burrs, it was there in the instruments section given below, or whether you want to do laser surgery. This is a recent advance. How much root end should be removed? Please keep in mind, like I said, you have to remember a minimum of 3 mm of the root surface has to be resected. However, if the root length is compromised, you may have to compromise on your root end resection as well, but then the prognosis lessens. And the angle at which the root end should be beveled. So generally we like to go perpendicular to the long axis of the tooth. The reason will be given in the next slides. Okay, so here you can see the root end resection, the planning which is to be done. So you can see that 3 mm of the root end tip is going to be resected, if you can see the figure on the left, and 3 mm, roughly 3 mm of your root end filling has to be done with your MTA. And the ultrasonics play a role here because they allow you to trough out the GP filling, that is your obturation from within the root canal, and you can create space for your MTA to flow in. So the ultrasonics actually help you to remove the gutta percha which is present inside the root canal from the retrograde end, and the space created is going to be filled with MTA. And then of course you have your gutta percha in the coronal and the middle third as well. Yeah, and the reason why we resect 3 mm of the root surface is because if you can see the figure on the right, you can see that there is root canal ramifications and the presence of lateral and accessory canals. So you have to understand that 98% chances of lateral and accessory canals are at the apical third of the roots. So that is why we tend to remove 3 mm, because we get rid of all the apical ramifications and lateral and accessory canals, because the lateral and accessory canals can serve as subsequent paths for reinfection of the surface, because in most obturations we do not see that the gutta percha is flowing or being filled into the lateral and accessory canals. So they are actually empty, because of which they can serve as pathways for reinfection. That is why we wish to get rid of them when we are performing our periradicular surgery. So like I said, 3 mm of root resection is done, and it will eliminate the apical ramifications and lateral canals and the accessory canals. And then of course because you are removing 3 mm of the root tip, you actually gain proper access so that the entire lesion can be removed around the root surface. And then of course you can evaluate the orthograde root canal filling which you had performed earlier, that is your gutta percha obturation. Yeah, okay. So now what are the requirements of an ideal root end filling material? They should be able to prevent the leakage of bacteria and their byproducts into the periradicular tissues, that is number 1. So you do not wish the chances of a subsequent reinfection. You wish that you want the root end filling material to be non-toxic, non-carcinogenic, biocompatible with the host tissue, so there should not be a foreign body reaction to the root end filling material itself. It should be insoluble in tissue fluids. So that is why GIC was discarded, because if you are not able to get a fluid free environment, your GIC is going to be soluble, and your properties of GIC are just going to diminish. You want the material to be dimensionally stable, and it should be unaffected by moisture during setting. So so that is why MTA and biodentine are the best materials right now, because they set even in the presence of moisture. Although the setting time is significantly higher for MTA, it is roughly 3 hours, around 2 hours 45 minutes. Biodentine on the other hand sets faster. I think within 45 minutes to an hour it can set. Even in the presence of moisture, blood, etc. So that is why these materials are now preferred. It should be easy to use. Let me warn you beforehand, using and manipulating and transferring of MTA and biodentine is not very easy. The mixing of MTA and the transporting using the carrier is not very easy, because the MTA is actually going to be in the form of a paste. So it is not going to be easy to compact and condense it into the root end preparation area. It is going to be like a smear. So it is not very easy to use. It should be radiopaque so that you can appreciate it on the radiograph. It should not stain your tooth like how your amalgam used to cause discoloration, and it should promote cementogenesis. So MTA, biodentine, they definitely promote cementogenesis. You can see the bone healing very fast within a couple of months. You can see the retroplast is another material which can be used. It has also shown to it is also proven to, it has shown considerably good results, so you can use that as well. The other materials like GIC, Diacat and resin ionomer, they are all very technique sensitive, so you have to be able to achieve a significantly high dry field when you are about to place the restorative material. So it's going to be tough because definitely the exudate and blood are going to be contaminating your field. An apical scar, you need to know what an apical scar is, because you should not mistake it to be a periapical lesion and then decide to perform a periradicular surgery, because an apical scar is nothing but a dense collagenous connective tissue in the bone at or near the apex. So the easiest way to differentiate it is that it is not going to be directly under the root surface. It is going to be lateral to the root. So you should know what an apical scar is, because you do not want to actually perform a surgery in such cases, because it is just a scar, and unless it has perforated both the facial and the lingual cortices and you can actually see a defect, a bony defect in the patient's mouth, only in such cases you are supposed to perform the surgery. Otherwise, an apical scar is just to be left. It is just a scar, so it can be ignored. So you should know what a scar is, how it looks like on the radiograph, and you should be able to differentiate between a lesion and a scar. Okay, so this is the bone graft material which is placed. It can be bovine or porcine extracts. This also facilitates healthy and rapid healing of the periradicular area. So along with MTA, you can actually use your bone graft also. You can sprinkle the powder inside on the surgical site to facilitate proper healing. So this is a different kind of surgical procedure. This is called hemisection. So in this case, we decide, like if you can see the pre-op IOPA, you can see that the distal end of the tooth has been eaten away by caries, and you see that the mesial is intact, and the root support, the bone support for the mesial root is quite good, whereas the prognosis of the distal end is poor because there is inadequate bone support and most of the coronal structure has been eaten away by caries. So what do you do? If the patient is willing to save a portion of the tooth, you can actually perform something known as hemisection. So you just split it. Hemi means half and section means to section the tooth. You cut away the tooth. So you can actually use the burrs to actually cut half of the coronal structure, remove it, and you can actually remove the distal root as well. Of course, you have to perform the endodontic therapy for the mesial half of the tooth, and you can actually save one root. So you can actually use it to act as a space maintainer, or you can use it as an abutment so that you can use it for a bridge as well. Of course, you cannot expect it to be used for a cantilever prep because it will be weak to support other teeth, but if it is part of a bridge, yes, definitely it can be used because it was after all part of a molar. Yeah, and hemisection can be clubbed with bicuspidization, so that will be covered in the next slide. So in this case, in case if you see that a molar on its own, the survival of the molar is going to be bad because the furcation involvement can be seen. However, the mesial and the distal roots, they have adequate bone support, and it is only the furcal bone loss which can be appreciated. So in such cases, you can actually convert your molar into a into two premolars. So what you do is you do your endodontic therapy in the molar, and then you split the tooth into two, and then you do your crown preps like as if and treat them like they are two premolars. Yeah, and by that you can actually save the tooth. So instead of giving one crown, you can actually split it and make it two premolar crowns. Yeah, so that ways you can actually save the tooth instead of actually going for extra. Decompression is nothing but the deballooning of soft tissue swelling which is seen. So you have to do a small incision. You have to aspirate the fluid, whatever is there. You have to keep a tube for drainage for a couple of weeks, and you have to allow for the drainage to occur, and of course you have to suture the tube in place. So after a week or maybe 1.5 weeks, you can actually remove the tube, and you will be able to see that the lesion has disappeared or significantly reduced. Intentional replantation, this is a controversial topic because many people may not want to do it, but yes, it has shown significant results. So what happens is you can actually intentionally extract the tooth, but as atraumatically as possible. Perform your root canal therapy quickly. So you have to be very, very quick, because the PDL fibers will not last long in the exterior external environment. So you have to perform your root canal therapy at least inside 20 minutes. It is significantly easier because the tooth is going to be in your hand. So within 15 to 20 minutes you have to replant the tooth. You have to remember that your extraction should be as atraumatic as possible, and you should keep the tooth moist. You should not rub away the PDL fibers, because once the PDL fibers are destroyed from the root surface, even after replacement, it's not going to heal because you don't have any supporting PDL fibers. So the optimal conditions are gentle extraction followed by reinsertion. You have to carefully manipulate the root surface, keep it as moist as possible, do your endodontic treatment, replant it within 15 minutes. Of course, you have to give it a splint for at least 2 weeks, and you have to eliminate occlusal contact so that there is no trauma from occlusion, so that you have to allow the tooth to actually heal on its own. So for 2 weeks you have to do the splinting, remove all the occlusal contacts. And of course you have to give your antibiotics and analgesics. The analgesics of course is if required, and the antibiotics, yes, definitely to allow the tooth region to heal. Yeah, so you can expect a certain amount of resorption. Resorption is acceptable, and it is expected to happen. So there are two types of resorption which can happen. You can have your inflammatory and you can have your replacement. So you should know the difference between the two. So the inflammatory resorption are the bowl-shaped areas which involve the cementum and the dentine. It is because of the presence of necrotic pulp and the presence of bacteria and their byproducts. So if you perform your root canal treatment, the inflammatory root resorption will go away. However, replacement resorption is what you are going to be facing if you do your intentional replantation. It refers to the resorption of the root surface and its substitution by bone, which results in ankylosis. So this happens because you are removing the tooth and then you are performing your endodontic therapy and then replacing the tooth back. So you can expect a certain amount of replacement resorption to happen. So that is why we tell you that you have to eliminate all the occlusal contacts, because it can be because of extensive trauma to the tooth's attachment apparatus. So that is why you want the tooth to heal for at least 10 to 14 days. That is why you splint it and you relieve all the occlusion, relieve the tooth from occlusion, so that you can give it some time to heal. So you minimize the chances of replacement. Okay, so this is what intentional replantation will look like. You can see there is a large periapical lesion. So in such cases, in this case already the root canal treatment has been done. So what you can do is you can gently extract the tooth as atraumatically as possible. You can clean the extraction socket site. You can remove all the granulation tissue. You can do your degranulation procedures. You can place your bone grafting material. You can do your root end preparation of the root surface. You can, as you can see in the second radiograph, you can actually place your root end filling material, that is your MTA, biodentine or retroplast, and then of course you have to provide your splinting. So then after that you can see because of the root resection, because of the root end filling material, after 6 months you can see a healthy bone formation. So the lesion has totally disappeared, and yes, after 12 months you can see a little bit of root resorption, that is normal, but then the root end filling material will take care and prevent the further resorption from taking place. So you can see that the prognosis has significantly improved. Of course, you have to have the patient to be willing to undergo this kind of a surgical procedure. If the patient is not willing, then of course you will have to think along the lines of extraction followed by prosthetic replacement. After, of course, removing the infection from the periradicular areas. So you do have to do degranulation after the extraction is done. Now the post-surgical management, this is very, very important. So this is what you are going to advise the patient after any form of surgical endodontics you carry out. avoid any strenuous activity for the remainder of the day. So when the patient walks in for an endodontic surgery, please make sure that there is somebody to accompany the patient back home. Do not allow the patient to drive. We do not wish the patient to be under any form of stress, because the blood sugar levels can fluctuate severely, because the patient has been on the dental chair for a couple of hours, and the patient of course has been stressed during the procedure. So you do not want to keep the patient under any further stress. So try to maintain a stress-free environment at least for that day. It is essential that you maintain an adequate diet with proper solid and fluid intake during the first 3 days post-surgery. So you want to keep the patient well nourished so that the healing can take place as fast as possible. Avoid manipulating the facial tissue as much as possible. So you do not want the patient to raise the lip or retract the cheeks to inspect the site or show it to others, because you may dislodge the sutures and delay the healing. Some amount of blood coming out from the surgical site is normal, so the patient should not get anxious if the patient sees blood even in the evening of the day of surgery. You can, of course, you should apply an ice bag with firm pressure on the day of the on the day following the surgery, because the ice pack it minimizes the formation of an extraoral and intraoral swelling. Of course, a certain amount of swelling is normal, but it will help to minimize the amount of swelling. So an ice bag should be applied with firm pressure to the site, to the face directly over the surgical site. You can keep it on for 10 minutes, give another 10 minutes rest, and then apply it again. So you can keep alternating it for 6 to 8 hours, but we prefer to recommend the ice pack for the entire day. So for 24 hours, ice should be applied. Please note that for the first 24 hours, nothing warm should be taken. Yeah, because if you introduce any heat to that area, it is going to cause an increase in the swelling, because the blood supply is going to increase rapidly in that area. So the exudate will not be flushed out, and you will have a larger swelling than you want it to happen. So only 24 hours after after the surgery, you can advocate heat packs as well, because you want the blood circulation to improve in that area and the exudates will be flushed out. So after the 24 hours, the cold pack is no longer going to be very effective. So you can actually switch over to your heat packs as well. But please remember, the day of the surgery, no heat. Yeah. So even the diet, it should be cold, or at least 1 or 2 degrees below room temperature. Yeah. So that you can facilitate healing and to reduce the chances of swelling. Post-surgical discomfort should be minimal, but of course the surgical site will be tender and sore. The sutures must be removed after the appropriate number of days. So for surgical endodontics, post 3 days you can remove the sutures. We generally recommend the sutures to be removed 3 to 5 days after the surgery, but before that they should not be dislodged from their place. Rinsing with chlorhexidine mouth rinse twice every day for 5 days is very good, because it keeps the site, it keeps it sterile and it facilitates your healing. Recall visits are definitely necessary, so the patient should visit us 1 day after the surgery, just so that we can evaluate the status, and of course after 3 to 5 days for the suture removal. If there are any complications, please do not hesitate to call us. You should make the patient feel comfortable and know that we can be trusted and we can be contacted at any time of the day. However, it is only when complications arise. So the patient should know what is a complication and what is not a complication. So certain amount of swelling, you should prepare the patient for certain amount of swelling and bleeding, and you should tell them that it is normal. However, if you feel that too much of discomfort is there, please walk back in. We are always there to you. Yeah. So these are the post-operative complications. You will have a lot of pain, severe pain. If this is there, then yes, the patient can walk back. Post-operative swelling, I told you, it is normal to a certain extent, but if you feel that too much of ballooning has happened, you are free to walk in. Bleeding on the same day is normal, but after 1.5 days, if you see that bleeding is occurring, please walk back. The sutures may have dislodged, or you may need to give additional sutures, so because of which the patient is definitely requested to walk back in. If the wound is infected, so in such cases you will have to maybe curettage that area. You may have to end up doing the surgical procedure again. We don't know, we'll have to take a call depending upon the clinical scenario. Discoloration and ecchymosis is one of the complications, yes, especially in the people who are very fair. You will see that the ecchymosis will be common. The entire the extraoral soft tissue might become bluish green also. So that generally disappears on its own after a couple of days. So that you should warn the patient that it is, and the patient should not get worked up on it. So this is it from my side on the lecture. If you have any doubts, please feel free to contact me. I'm always available, and yes, we can discuss further if the need arises. So thank you very much. Take care and stay safe, guys.